Without further ado, I want to welcome Joe Nichols to the stage with IDAS Digital, a partner with Digital Thinker. And thank you, Joe, and excited to hear what you have to say.
Takes a minute, thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Happy to be presenting after lunch today. I hit ChatGPT this morning and I said, you know what, what's the percentage of people that fall asleep during a presentation after lunch? And just doing some quick calculations, I think 2 of you are gonna end up nodding off. Don't be alarmed if I call you out, if that's the case. But we're also gonna try to do something that's a little bit more interactive today to get you guys engaged and maybe see some insights from the audience as well. So today's topic is a very generic one, effective approaches to asset management. But what I'll do is talk a lot more about this concept of asset performance management, which is seen as a great complement to probably a lot of work you guys are doing with enterprise asset management. So would love for the audience to interact with us today. And so if you're interested, I'm gonna be hitting some topics and doing some survey questions. And I think everybody will be interested to see what everybody else has to say on some of these survey questions. So a couple of ways to go about this. You can go scan the QR code, and what that's gonna do is take you to an app called Menti, which we've queued up some questions. You can feel free to walk through the process and answer those questions now. You can do it as we talk through the topics. And then what I'll plan to do is we'll reveal the survey results to you so that you can kind of see what everybody else is up to in certain areas of managing their asset strategies. If you don't get the QR code to work, you can go to menti.com on your phone and enter in that numeric code, and that'll get you there as well. So it looks like a lot of people are engaging. So can anybody just kind of give me some visual cues that you're in there, that you're seeing the questions? We're good? Okay, awesome, very good, all right. Very good. So real quick, didn't introduce myself, but just a quick backdrop. My name is Joe Nichols. I'm with a company called IDAS Digital. I'll tell you a little bit more about how we interact and play with the Hexagon ecosystem. But been in this business for quite a while, specifically in the area of how to take industrial data and turn it into insights. And I'll leave that very generic and talk to you guys about some of those concepts moving forward. So just to kind of get the question and the survey piece going and the kinks ironed out of that, the first question was all asking, where have you come from to attend Streamline? And so the first test to see if we can actually make this work is, can we see the survey results, Alex? You notice I said Alex. I was very intentional in my accountability here. Very good, all right, looks like we've got some results. So let's see. Somebody's been verbose. I think I know who the low country person is. Trying to figure out who's come from the farthest. Yeah, scroll down a little bit further. It might be Tucson? Do we have a vote for Tucson? Virginia Beach? Vancouver, okay. Am I missing something with the West Broad Street, top of the hill? Is that like right here somewhere? Okay, sorry, just wanted to make sure I got that. All right, Tallahassee, 10 miles. Italy, wow. All right, very good. All right, we've had some travelers here. Well, we're really good. Well, that was great to see. We've got quite a cross-section here, obviously, today. So thanks for participating, giving us some insights where you're coming. Nowhere? All right, who did nowhere? The rest of the questions are not free form, so we won't have, the jokesters won't be able to kind of continue with that nonsense. So, well, good. So thanks for that. Obviously, have the kinks worked out. So let me talk a little bit more about just our background, where we're from, and where we fit into this. So once again, co-founder of IDAS Digital, and we're a new entrant to the Hexagon ecosystem, and partners now with Hexagon and Digital Thinker. And our backgrounds have been working with industrial data and enterprise asset management data with a bunch of unnamed inferior enterprise asset management systems. So we have a lot of experience in this space, and super excited to be working within the Hexagon space given the usage and all the great things we hear about the usability of this tool and all the great things that you guys are doing with it. So we are absolutely obsessed and focused on this concept of operationalizing asset strategies. So I'm gonna do a bunch of surveys and questions for the group here, but quick question, how many were in George Williams' strategy session earlier? Looks like a couple of you, okay, good. So he talked a lot about the process of developing asset strategies, and I'm gonna really kind of hone in onto this concept of operationalizing them, and I'll explain what that means in a little bit more detail. One of the other interesting things we're doing right now is our digital solutions are being deeply integrated to the Hexagon EAM solution. We're working on that right now. I'll be describing that in a little bit more detail as we go into the presentation, but for those of you that are using the system and maybe interested in some of these techniques that I'm gonna talk about today, let me know. Happy to talk to you about what we're up to there and drive that a little bit further. So asset performance management is just to introduce the topic a little bit further, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but it's a software and solutions segment that has been around for about 20 years. It's growing rapidly in terms of its usage and adoption. For Dantix, an industry analyst firm that you guys might be aware of, I think they've got one of the cleanest kind of definitions for it. That's what you're seeing in the quotes there. But as you read that definition, you can see what it's all about is defining content, analyzing equipment data, tapping into your existing data sources, and understanding where your risk, costs, and performance is around the assets that you're managing on a day-to-day basis. And so that's really the essence of it. There's a lot of different ways to kind of look at it, but I'll talk about some very specific aspects of it today to give you some more insights into how it complements what you're already doing inside of Hexagon EAM. So just to talk a little bit about the benefits and the drivers. So when done correctly, there's generally 3 big value buckets that you can tap into when you are looking at these APM work processes. So one of them is getting after unplanned downtime and creating uptime through advanced warning and advanced detection of potential failures that are moving into your business or moving around the assets. So by continually monitoring the work you're doing, the corrective work that's out there, the conditions of the asset, you can get, we're gonna talk a little bit about this concept of the PF curve, which got introduced earlier. Getting advanced warning when potential failure can occur gives you time, and that's what it's really all about, giving you more time to make sure you got the people, the parts, the resources in place to address it before the accident or the failure becomes catastrophic or overly expensive. One of the other big value drivers is getting after an optimization profile for spend in maintenance. So by utilizing some of these techniques, you can get into a much better frame of where do I need to apply the maintenance resources, at what level, and to some degree an understanding of where I don't need to do maintenance. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And then another big area of opportunity or value that comes with these solutions is really about lowering overall operational risks. So by having everybody on the same page about which assets are risky, which ones are causing the most trouble, which ones do we need to focus on, the entire organization can have a better management of the overall risk of what that looks like. But unfortunately, it's not a perfect scenario. And this is a really interesting statistic from ARC, another industry analyst firm, that highlights some of the challenges that are out there. So what you'll see here is in a respondent from their study a couple years ago called Rethinking Asset Performance Management, 65% of the respondents said they either didn't believe they were gonna get value from their RCM program or had not received or delivered value from their RCM program. That's not the RCM methodology's fault. And we see the big fall down, if you will, or the big hiccups in this process is a lot of people look at asset strategy development processes or RCM processes as a project. We go through the study, we understand where the risk is, we understand where the failures can occur, we build a plan to go address it. Done, put it in a book, put it on a shelf. Hopefully it goes inside of Hexagon EAM, but that's not always the case, depending on the organization. So we like to make sure people understand that you have to look at it as a continuous process. It's got to live and breathe because, as everyone here knows, over time equipment degrades, business objectives change, operational conditions change. So all of those things can dynamically impact what you thought was the right thing to do 2 years ago relative to what you're doing now. So we believe that this concept of an asset strategy it's really got to be operationalized and it's got to be implemented and managed, measured, and governed over the life cycle of the asset. And that's what we're going to drill into a little bit more detail today in terms of operationalization. So we've proposed a process which is frankly a specialized version of Plan, Do, Check, Act. So is everybody familiar with Plan, Do, Check, Act? It's pretty well known, good, yep. So we've applied that technique to common asset performance management objectives and goals that are out there. And it's a really simple process that we believe is the key to operationalizing strategies and allowing you to continually optimize those. So first step is really assessing risk. And we've talked a little bit about risk on this stage already today, but it's really, really important to understand, out of all the assets that you're managing, what are the ones that matter and what are the failure modes that really matter? Because that's the target-rich environment to get the value out of the systems. With an understanding of risk, then it's really about establishing the strategy. So a PM plan, an operational plan to monitor, an inspection plan, maybe it's a design change that you need to implement. We call this the protect phase. Understand where the risk lies and establish a rock-solid strategy to actually mitigate that risk over time. And most of the time, these activities materialize themselves inside of PM plans, inside of a maintenance system. So that's usually the two easy steps is what's risky, what do I do? But then the question is how do I tap into all the existing data sources that I have, the work orders I'm creating and closing, the SCADA data that I might have available to tell me the conditions, and use that to continually evaluate, am I on plan or off plan? Is the strategy on asset? Is the asset on strategy? Or do I have potential failure mechanisms starting to arise? And then the final step in this kind of simple four-step process is once you've identified something's off, the state's off, the failure mode's getting identified, an anomaly is detected, driving a prescriptive or corrective action to go address that as quickly as possible, once again, depending on the risk level that you're dealing with the asset that you're looking at. And then the cycle starts over, right? I've had a remediation that I can now apply to other equipment, to other equipment types that I've learned from this cycle that I've run through, and you can continually optimize around that. So that's a process that you can consider to operationalize an asset strategy. So that gets us to our next question that we presented inside of the application. So have you analyzed your assets using any sort of risk or criticality assessment process? So the survey says, we've got about a 40-60 split here, so really good. So for the 40%ers that have done this, is most of that work being done in the criticality tool inside of Hexagon? Just looking for hands, okay, all right, good. Some of those, all right, good. Spreadsheets, other places, okay, good. That's actually a number that I'm encouraged to see. I thought it'd actually be a little bit lower than that. So 40% of you have gone down this road of understanding what's critical and driving that process. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this risk assessment techniques and how you can approach those. Okay, for 40% of you, I think you understand why you do risk assessments. For the 60% that may not have gone down this road, here's a couple things to consider to think about if you're determining if you want to go down this process. So one of the things that we think is really important is giving complete line of sight from operators all the way to executives on what is actually critical inside of the business. That alignment and understanding really helps with investment planning, general work direction, prioritization, et cetera. Of course, it does help with work order prioritization. If you've got two work orders sitting there, one's on a high critical asset, one's on a low critical asset, easy to make a decision about if you only have enough time in the day, where you're gonna place that work and when you're gonna get it done. The other piece is just in terms of setting up your PM plans and making sure that you've got the investment dollars tied to the biggest impact from a proactive maintenance perspective. And then we see quite a bit that there could be a lot of cost savings for work that you're doing that just doesn't need to be done. And once you understand that run to failure is, you've evaluated a situation that run to failure is an option, you just let it fail. It's a hard thing for some people to do. You can redirect those resources where needed from there. So those are some really good objectives about why you want to go through this process and drive it. I wanted to talk about two methods. There's a ton of methods. Let me say this. There's a lot of methods to go through this process. You've got a great tool sitting inside of EAM. People use spreadsheets. People use all kinds of methods. The most popular is what we would call a qualitative risk assessment process that uses a risk matrix. I've got an example up here. And there's some newer techniques coming out that are now leveraging the data that's being collected, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, that's more quantitative in nature. And there's pros and cons to both of these, and these aren't mutually exclusive. You can actually use one to feed the other, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So with a risk matrix approach or a qualitative approach, it's great because they're simple. People can generally look at them, look at the colors, it's intuitive, they understand. And it also provides this multidimensional capability of being able to look at risk across not only production impacts, but quality impacts, safety impacts, reputation impacts. So go through that process of identifying in your organization, how do we classify risk and how do we count it? And people can generally get their head around it pretty quickly. The cons with a risk matrix are that they're generally subjective. You've got people in a room or a person in a room making a decision based upon their knowledge base. They tend to be static. These risk matrix exercises tend to just, someone might set a 5-year interval to reevaluate risk and just do it on a time basis. So you get these big chunks of time when people may not have assessed risk and things may have changed. And they can be very resource intensive. A general practice that we've seen here is put 5 of the best, most knowledgeable people in a room, lock them down, and go equipment by equipment by equipment by equipment and ask the questions and get to a scoring method. And I'm not saying that to say don't do it. Doing any risk assessment process from my perspective is actually really, really good. It's just a matter of what works for your organization and what works for you to get to the ultimate objective of where do we focus our efforts. And I realize now that I've got a typo here. The right side should say quantitative, so apologize for that. But there's some quantitative techniques that you can use to analyze data to fast track this process and get it a little bit more definitive. And so by leveraging existing data about failure rates, types of failures that have occurred, costs associated with corrective work, you can get to a much tighter and faster answer on where should I focus my efforts. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but there are companies that are now in a great position to leverage their data that they've been collecting to get quantitative risk scores very, very rapidly and use that as the basis to start with the prioritization effort. I've seen the quantitative approach actually feed the qualitative approach. So fast tracking something like probability of failure or frequency of failure through a work order analysis can actually help you in the qualitative side of making the right selection on how frequently will this potential failure risk emerge. So those are two approaches, and we're gonna come back and talk about this quantitative one a little bit further in just a few minutes. Okay, so that's kind of that first step of where does my risk lie inside of the business? Where do I want to focus and prioritize the efforts? So next question that we asked the team here was, how have you developed your asset strategies or PM plans? And so if we could see the results on that one, Alex. Okay, this is actually fairly similar to what I've seen doing some of these surveys in the past. So a lot of you are using OEM recommendations, which is a great starting point. So we've got about half of you using OEM recommendations. And then it looks like about 20% have had a couple of bad accidents, or they're just scared something's gonna happen again. And so they've reacted and said, let's go do this, this, and this on a piece of equipment to make sure that never happens again. So it looks like about 20%, I know that was a dramatic example, but it looks like about 20% of you are going down that road. There are some folks here using what is known as an RCM FMEA, or I've even thrown in RBI, so a method, a defined standard method and approach to understand how to get to the outcome of how I'm gonna do my maintenance. That's a pretty good number for the audience here. It's about 25% of you are using that approach. 6 are not sure, and then we'll talk a little bit more about strategy libraries. It looks like some of you are actually leveraging predefined libraries that are out there that can help fast track this process as well. Are these numbers surprising to anybody in the audience? Is this, try to, you thought there would be more of those? Okay, all right, good. And not to beat up the OEM recommendations too much, but one of the challenges with that is they're generally done to serve warranties and parts orders. Sometimes, are any OEMs in the room? I used to be one, so. They're a great starting point, but of course, they're not accounting for your operating context and how you're running the equipment and your business objectives. So super important to, if you start with OEM recommendations, try to do your best to tailor those to your specific operating context and conditions that are out there. But very good. So let's talk about the development of these asset strategies, and that's the second step in this process that we're proposing, which is establish a plan to protect the asset in various ways. And just some thoughts and objectives that we like to share with people when you're developing PM plans or asset strategies. We like to push people to say every maintenance activity you're doing should have some traceability to either perceived or known failure mode that you're actually experiencing. So have a reason for why you're going to do that. And so that we like to anchor everybody to a frame of make sure you know what you're mitigating and why. And of course, always map that back to the risk profile of the equipment. Personally, I'm not hung up on methods and analysis rigor on this. I think just having people go through the process in whatever way works for their organization is much better than nothing. Somebody developing a rocket is probably much more comfortable using a full SAE JA1011 RCM process, which is fairly intensive. But sometimes we go to a water municipality and they say, nope, it's pumping station 10 and 8. And we know that because of the cost profile and all the headaches it's caused. So just going through the process and having a method to get to what's risky and what should I do to mitigate that is actually the most important point. And it's highly, highly variable based upon your organization's maturity. So we like to ask people to really consider what works well for them before just jumping into a specific methodology or analysis rigor that's around it. There's two real key places that this output of a strategy can go inside of EAM that drives real big benefit. One is obviously a PM plan or an inspection plan. Go do this to mitigate that risk. The other piece is driving alignment between the identified failure modes in a theoretical study. This is what could happen, and ensuring that you've got an ability to track that when you close an order, a corrective order specifically. And what that allows you to do is ensure that hypothetical failure modes and actual failure modes can be measured and gaps can be assessed between those. So in other words, if I've got a failure mode that I have found as a result of a corrective work order that has not been addressed in the original study, you can do some gap assessments and close those loops on those two things. The other good news today is there are a ton of standards and libraries and predefined content that you can take advantage of, so you're not writing this from scratch. And so a couple of examples, you guys are probably aware of a lot of these, but I just thrown a couple of them out here. There is, ISO has a whole series of standards, 14224, 55000. One of the IDIS members that are here today is actually on the Asset Management Committee. You can leverage those extensively. They don't cover all equipment types, but they give you great practices, great workflows, great definitions to anchor to, so that you can come out of the gates without debating all these things internally inside of your organization and get right to the meat of what is it we need to do and how do we do it. I don't think we have any offshore customers. I'm not sure I've seen any, but I might have that wrong. But ARETA is a consortium and a database that is really, really good for offshore oil and gas equipment, failure modes, criticalities, PM plans, inspection plans, and even failure rate definitions. So if you're in that industry, certainly take a look at that. API has some really good standards around fixed equipment and rotating equipment as well. So obviously APIs are a great example. And then selfishly promoting, we have what we call an asset twin library at IDIS that will now be available for management around Hexagon EAM, which covers 200 equipment types. So for 200 equipment types, we've got starter points for all the failure modes, all the PM plans, all the things you should monitor, and even some of the things that you should do when we find certain conditions, like a hot bearing, lacquer lubrication, predefined corrective actions that you can go about doing that. You can see some of the statistics up there, but certainly let us know if you have any more interest in learning more about those or questions. And those library elements can be once again, used to feed PM plans. They can also be used to feed problem codes and order closure codes that might be useful for you as you kind of go through the process of collecting the data and using that to improve efforts moving forward. So I've assessed risk. I have identified an asset strategy which creates a protection scheme for how I want to mitigate risk around the asset. And then you've got to actually apply techniques to understand when failure risk is starting to emerge. And that's this third step in the process that I was describing around monitoring the equipment. So we asked the group a question. We preformed a bunch of techniques to watch for, mitigate, identify emerging failure risk. And so let's take a look at the results on that one. So I gave you some options here. We just react. About 20% of you look like you're in a state where you're busy. That's all you can do. You can just react to what's going on that's out there. Good number around time-based maintenance, about 45%. And then I'll say a combined, 36% using condition or predictive maintenance is actually a really good sign for this crowd. So those are some interesting results. Good, well, that's great to see. Is any of this surprising anybody here? Your thoughts? Everyone asleep? Don't want to interact? That's good. Good. Well, good interesting results there. Yeah. Well, that's a really good point. Is it because they don't understand? Are they flooded? Well, I'm happy to talk with you later, but yes, I got questions. Yeah, so this is not something I have a slide on, but it is actually a really important point. We're going to start talking about some of these advanced techniques to identify failure risk. And the analytics and the technologies to do that aren't the special thing, right? There's 100 or 1,000 of them out there. Excuse me. It's the process, right? For what am I going to do when an automated system looks at data and tells me, the guy that's been managing this asset for 30 years in a certain way, that I need to do something differently. That's the heart. It's the change management and the culture and change management around some of these automated decision-making tools, which is really, really hard. And that's one of the hardest parts of some of these projects for people that are going down that road. So, that's right. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Good feedback. Well, good. So I was asking about George's presentation earlier because he introduced the concept of the P/F curve, which probably a lot of people in here are aware of, but just to kind of explain it really, really briefly, it's a theoretical definition that demonstrates that equipment generally degrades over time, conditions of equipment generally degrade over time, and that there's an ability to detect potential failure mechanisms as that time goes on through various analytical techniques or evaluation techniques. And so we like to tell people to look at the PF curve as a way to dictate how you think about how much you're going to invest in an analytical strategy to detect a failure. And this whole concept of artificial intelligence and machine learning and advanced AI are driving people to call we have an AI engine, and people call us every day and they say, can you tell us about your AI? They don't call us to ask us, can you solve some of our equipment performance problems? And so there's a lot of hype around AI, and what everyone's gonna try to tell you is just apply AI and everything's gonna be okay. Well, we like to kind of take a step back from that and say, well, actually it's a little bit different from that. You gotta come back from a risk basis and from a practicality basis and understand what makes sense for the equipment that we're talking about here. And so we use the PF curve as context to help people think about where do I want to apply advanced techniques and why. And so we tell people generally work from right to left on this PF curve as you start assessing these capabilities and these ways to get after and detecting failures in a much more earlier sense. And that far right quadrant there, as you can see, is a theoretical reactive kind of scenario. Something functionally fails or completely fails, I go back out and I fix it. And as I said earlier, a run to failure strategy is perfectly optimal if you've assessed it for that. And so there's a lot of assets out there. We would say 20 to 30% of the assets that are out there, maybe even more depending on your industry, that you can just put in that bucket and say, it is what it is, and we'll manage it that way. And then of course, most people in this room here are kind of working on that next step up, which is how do I get in front of failure with just some simple plan techniques of inspecting, monitoring, lubricating, et cetera. And so that's obviously a first line of defense for failure mitigation. It's generally, it's probably core to a lot of the work that you guys are doing inside of the EAM system. And then as you're looking to buy more time, I need more advanced warning so I can get in front of a parts order, so I can get the resources mobilized, so I can safely shut down before something completely blows itself apart. That's where you start looking at high critical capabilities to provide advanced warning. And you can do that in a couple of different ways, but the first step where we see a lot of value generated, or most value generated, is just simple first principles evaluation of equipment condition. It's hot, it's vibrating. It's hot and it's vibrating. Simple things using thresholds, rules, basic analytics can solve a significant amount of problems in terms of getting an understanding of what's going on with the equipment. And we would say, sure, get excited about AI and machine learning, but do it on super, super, super critical equipment where you have the data and where you have the investment money to go say, if the turbine goes down in a power plant, that requires special monitoring and attention. So reserve that investment for those areas. So we'll talk about a couple more techniques here, but we see this as the roadmap to help evaluate that. Once again, it kind of ties back to the risk discussion we were having earlier, but these are various ways that you can go about looking at establishing a strategy to monitor. As I mentioned, everyone calls us and they want to talk about machine learning, and then we ask them, but what about just basic Pareto analysis? Do you know what your bad actors are? Do you know what your bad facilities are? Do you know what your most dominant failure modes are? All of that can be done using the simple 80-20 rule, typically based upon data that you're already collecting today. Cost data, frequency data, counts of failures, cost of maintenance, cost of planned maintenance. And so, particularly for those things that you kind of put in that far right bucket of, I'm okay letting that run to failure, just put it into a metric where you can watch and see if bad actors start popping up and you have high expense profiles that you don't like, and then you can work them. But you don't have to do super crazy analytics to get to that decision on those things. One of the other things we see people kind of overlooking is just the idea of PM compliance. If I've gone through the process of understanding how something fails and I want to put a PM plan to mitigate that potential failure from occurring, well, we probably want to make sure the PM's getting done. And we probably want to make sure the PM's actually getting done on time so that we're actually mitigating the risk. So we like to kind of point people back to maybe some really basic capabilities, which says, put some simple tools in place where you can watch for actual completion and actual deviation of work being completed on time, and automatically alert if you've got PM plans that are addressing critical failure modes that aren't getting done on time. And there's some great tools out there that will allow you to do that directly from the work order data. My guess is this audience probably has a bunch of PM compliance reporting in place already. So once again, nothing super crazy here, just am I doing what I said I'm gonna do to mitigate the failure risk through standard PM activities. That can also be applied on a time basis or a usage basis, depending on how you've configured the order and the triggering of the order. Just kind of working left from that right-hand quadrant again on the PF curve. Then you could start working into your more critical equipment and using some more sophisticated techniques to get more finite answers about what's going on in terms of potential compliance with the strategy or operationalization of that strategy. So kind of the next step up is really getting into failure rate predictions, failure probability projections, MTBF calculations using various statistical methods, by the way, which you have in your EAM solution, to really get at a better, more finer point understanding of failure rates and consequences that are around that. And then also getting into measurements where you're starting to look at equipment condition. And this is kind of where a lot of interest has been generated lately, which is let me just drive condition-based maintenance. I think it was 17% of you are doing that. So let me actively monitor for emerging failure modes, emerging conditions from my existing systems and identify and let people know when certain conditions are starting to emerge and that they start to present risk inside of the business. As I mentioned before, simple thresholds, simple analytics, simple rules can really, really do a lot of great work here for identifying emerging failure risk. And then there's really some more interesting things you can do to aggregate that data into broader health indexes, broader condition indexes, things along those lines. And of course, condition doesn't necessarily always come from sensors. It can come from an inspection checklist, which is manually generated because I don't have sensors at the asset. I've got people walking around doing routes, manually collecting that information. Well, that's all amazing information to understand the current condition of the asset. Then get to that far, far left of that highly critical equipment that has high consequence of failure, that's catastrophic when things happen. Then think about using some of these advanced anomaly detection techniques that are out there. So there's very capable technologies today that will allow us to bring together complex data streams at high volume in great detail, multiple variables around it, identify anomalies based upon failure conditions that have occurred in the past, and automatically trigger and prescribe work. So this is kind of the heart of what a lot of true prescriptive maintenance engines are doing today. They're using massive data sets, high volume data, high compute, and looking for a pattern that is indicating that a potential failure risk is occurring, a temperature spike, a deviation in bearing temperatures, a startup anomaly. All those things are easily modeled and easily defined, and there's really great ways to just automatically advise people that those things are starting to occur. You need to get somebody out there to investigate it right away. So talked about 3 of those kind of 4 major areas of that work process. The act step, don't have any slides on that, but obviously once you've identified something that needs to be followed up on, ensuring a very clean process to get all the stakeholders organized around whatever that is. Temperature's high, what does operations say, what does maintenance say? Being able to pull that information together and have a collaborative discussion on, we now need to do this, is a key step of the process, but just wanted to highlight that as that last step is a really, really important step, but wanted to focus on some of the front-end processes for the discussion today. So we asked another question, are you interested in performing risk assessments with the EAM data today? So clearly this question is probably more for 40% of the room, but just interested in what the results are here. So 85% of you said yes, which is great. So there is an appetite to try to leverage the work order data inside of EAM to really understand what risk might be out there. Reason we asked this question is we're here today to kind of offer a pretty interesting capability for free for the team here with some new techniques that you might want to take advantage of. And I'm going to walk you through that in a little bit more detail, but it's a quantitative risk assessment that I was talking about a little bit earlier. So this is a capability that the IDIS team built a couple years ago. There's about 150 companies that use it today for free. It is called Asset Risk Analyzer. It's as simply as going to that website and registering. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail today. But if you're looking for a way to do a rapid analysis of your existing work order data, this is a way to do that and get it done within minutes. I'll talk to you about that in just a few more minutes. So what we can do is examine that work order data, aggregate it up into a consequence or cost profile, a failure rate profile, and provide a risk-ranked definition of the most risky assets inside of your business. That can be done based upon, tell me what my riskiest pumps are. You can do it by equipment class. You can do it by facility. Tell me my facility that has the most risk exposure based upon the corrective work that we're executing inside of the system. And it also does some early benchmarking of failure rates. So part of our library has industry failure rates for things like pumps, MTBF values. So we can calculate your actual MTBF, or we can use the calculated MTBF you have in the system and do a quick comparison of that against the industry values. And what that gives you is an instant understanding of I'm performing below industry or above industry, and lets you ask the next 5 questions. Why is that? And as I mentioned from the beginning, this risk assessment process is really about understanding where to drive and prioritize efforts that are out there. So we've created a process. We've worked with the Hexagon product team and created a process that we think is fairly straightforward to allow you to get some of these insights rather quickly. So 4 steps: go into EAM and set up a couple of views. We've defined all the syntax to get the view in place to extract and prepare the asset and work order data necessary to do the risk assessment. Map that view to a grid, run the grid, export that data, and then upload that into the Asset Risk Analyzer tool. And then you're gonna get a very, very quick assessment, once again, of the risk that you see inside of the business around the assets that you've analyzed. So we've gone through this process. Well, we've got about 150 companies that completely self-serve this, but because we were able to work with the Hexagon team and kind of get this data integration thing sorted out pretty quick, we're happy to work with you, help give you guys the syntax for the views, give you the importable metadata for the grids, and walk you through this process, and then let you guys go through this process as a result of coming to the conference today. And the Digital Thinker team is also offered to support anybody in that process if they want to go through it. So we'd love to have everybody sign up, join. There's a couple other IDIS team members here. You can hit us up on the app if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this. But we've worked with quite a few Hexagon customers more recently that we've almost always been able to give them some pretty interesting insights around what's risky, what's off industry benchmark. And one of the other things I didn't describe in the tool, which is really, really cool, is not only will it tell you where your risk lies, but it's also gonna give you a value calculation that says, if you could reduce your probability of failure by X, Y, or Z, what is actually worth to the business? Because one of the things we're also calculating is a quantitative consequence score for every corrective order that gets generated against a particular piece of equipment. So it's a great place to, one, expose risk, identify where you might want to spend some time developing strategies, and of course, a roadmap for applying some of these techniques that I've described today around this operationalized asset strategy concept. So just leaving you with a couple of key takeaways. Yet another QR code if you want to go to that website for Asset Risk Analyzer. Some of my information. Rachel Wagner and Mark LaPlante are here all week with me as well, so we're not going anywhere. We'd love to chat with anybody. But I think my message to you is, as we work with Hexagon EAM customers, what we're seeing is most of you have implemented some great asset management practices. You've got your assets in place, you're planning and scheduling work, you're documenting what's going on out there. And extensions of that into core strategy development and operationalization of strategies can drive some interesting new value streams for you, like we talked about early on in the presentation. Our motto and our philosophy is, in any of these sorts of efforts, start small, start simple, be very agile with it. Don't try to do a whole facility, don't try to do a whole plant. Worry about pumping station 8. Like I said, we went to a water authority, that's all they cared about, and we were able to get some pretty quick insights on that. So don't boil the ocean, and use some of these practical techniques of keeping things small and then iterating out as you get value so that you can stay in a program and keep it driving. And of course, we invite you to start today at assetriskanalyzer.com or just reach out to one of us and have a chat. We're happy to walk you through that process and maybe give you some insights on what's going on inside of the assets in your business. So with that, I'll conclude. Thanks for the time today.
Thank you. Joe, I do have one question for you from Danny Dunafin in the audience. He has asked, has the definition on predictive maintenance changed over time?
Depends on who you ask. But I think there's a lot to unpack there. But first of all, not everybody's aligned on the base definition of predictive maintenance. I think I would need to know more to properly answer the question, but it is a highly variable context depending on who you're talking to. We've got a view I'm happy to share with anybody, but hard for me to answer that kind of broad question. So feel free to engage with me and talk to me a little bit more. I'll be sure to give you an opinion, that's for sure. Any other questions? Well, great. I hope this was interesting, and thanks for the time. Yeah.